Hey everyone, it's Mimi and Weezus.
Hey guys, what's good?
Today we're gonna... What? Oh, I thought you were going like that.
Oh my god. No, dude,
you
sorry.
You just accidentally tapped me? I'm good.
By accident.
Today we're gonna record about the Boeing scandal. We know it's been covered a billion times, but we're gonna do it anyway, okay? So, before we start though, thanks again for all your support on our last few episodes. We really do appreciate it. We're working on trying to get back to 2 episodes a week, but it's been a bit of an adjustment for Jesus and I now that we live together and work together and podcast together. So we're trying our best.
It's like running a business without running the business.
Yeah. Like we have to run this business that we don't get paid for, and then we just abuse each other the whole time. So
mentally, guys. Mentally.
Yeah, mentally, not physically. Anyways, so we are going to cover Boeing today. And everybody knows Boeing, right? Like, we've all heard of it. I used to live next to the Boeing factory when I lived in Phoenix.
Oh, nice.
And one of my friends actually worked for them, which is crazy. At their warehouse or something like that.
You think if we talk about them, he's going to get murdered? No.
Why did I give a hint?
Miranda doxing people. What's her name?
I'm not going to say, dude.
Back in Phoenix, Arizona No, just kidding.
No, she moved, so we're fine. Anyway, so everyone used to trust them, right? Until the crashes. So there was 2 back-to-back plane crashes, which is everyone's biggest nightmare, right? I hate flying on planes. I get anxiety.
We blame Final Destination for this.
Yes. So, like I said, 2 planes crashed back-to-back. And this was way back in... I shouldn't even say way back, because this is actually pretty recent. So this is in 2018 and 2019, right? And these crashes ended up just being like 19 weeks apart. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So that puts them like October 2018... and March 2019, so barely any space in between. We'll start with the Lion Air Flight 610. This is actually from Indonesia Airlines.
Yeah.
And 180 people passed away in this crash. So, it crashed shortly after takeoff, dude. It had barely been in the air for 13 minutes before it crashed.
Is this the one that was only up like 1,000 feet?
I believe so. Yeah, this is the one. This is the very first one.
The very first one?
Yeah,
okay.
So this is the first one. So it was up like, it started at like 1,700 feet and then kept going down and up and down and up. So Indonesia Airlines had actually been banned from flying in the U.S. like back in the day because they were having too many problems and like issues, I guess. I don't know.
It's like people were dying.
Yeah, well, and I don't know exactly what happened, why they got banned, but they were banned previously. So when this crash first happens, that's what people blame. Well, Indonesia Airlines, we've had problems with them before.
For sure.
So it's their fault. Well, and people were like, I guess so. I mean,
But a flight to China.
Yeah, so like, I don't know.
Or Malaysia, sorry.
Well, things got crazy. The other one's to China.
Oh.
Yeah, but you're close, though. So then, the Indonesian investigators, right, at this point, after they were getting blamed, their airline, they found both the black boxes. So there's 2 different kinds of black boxes, too. There's one that's, like, records everything in the cockpit, and then there's a different black box that records all the flight data.
Yeah.
So it gets, like, the altitudes, the throttles, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it, like, tells you what's happening. So they were able to recover those. Oh, and by the way, another thing from this episode, my dogs broke my laptop, and I usually have, like, all my notes typed up on there. But I had to write them by hand this time, so you're going to hear that a lot because I have to turn my pages because I made too many notes, guys. Anyways, so what the flight data showed on that black box was that right after takeoff, the sensor that measures the angle of the nose of the plane, it showed an error. So it like wasn't measuring accurately is basically what it was showing. And the faulty sensor, that sends over other data to the aircraft system, which is basically what this whole scandal is about, and this whole lawsuit is about the system that it's sending this data over to, right? Data, whatever.
Yeah.
So the new Boeing 737 MAX 8, that's the planes we're talking about, and that's what caused all this scandal. They had this new system put in, right? It was called the MCAS system.
Yeah.
It stands for Maneuvering Characteristic Augmentation System. We'll just call it the MCAS for MCAS for the remaining episode. But that sensor, this is the weird part, is that Boeing only had one of these sensors on the plane. Whereas, okay, so if that fails, then the whole system's just screwed, you know?
Yeah.
And they didn't care. They didn't really think it through. They just put it on there. Anyways, so that sensor on the outside of the plane that sends messages to that system is saying, oh, hey, the plane is not at the right angle. So this MCAS system kicks in and pushes the nose of the plane down, right? So they have...
Just one thing on that, Miranda, that I know. The reason this system was implemented in the 737 MAX was because they added new engines to the side of the plane, and they need to compensate for that weight because the plane were older planes, adding new engines to them, so they were basically refurbished.
Well, and the reason they did that, there's a big story behind it, and I'll actually just tell it right now, is that we've got Boeing and Airbus. They're our two biggest competitors for airplane manufacturers in the world, right? And in 2010, Airbus came out and they were like, yo, we're going to update our A320 plane. We're going to make it 15% more efficient. We're going to do this and do that. You know, it was this whole new thing. Well, Boeing, they had nothing to compete with that. They were like, oh shit, the Airbus is already taking over. We don't have anything to release. What are we going to do? They're going to take all the sales. This is the awesome idea, an awesome product. What do we do?
It's like we have all these old planes laying around. Maybe we could do something with that.
Yeah, exactly. So to compete, they were like, well, we can't build a brand new plane, but what if we just update our 737? And the problem is that the 737 is already pretty low to the ground. So you can even look at like any of the 737 models, and the engines are not even completely circle, you know, they're almost like a flatter on the bottom, just so that they can clear the ground and they're not grinding on the ground when they land and all that stuff. Well, to compete, like I said, they said, let's update this. Let's put more bigger engines, more fuel-efficient engines on these planes.
Yeah.
Well, the plane is too small. So they can't just whip on bigger engines and hope it
and
makes
apart
it
from
last.
being too small, it was also a 30-year-old plane at that point.
Yeah. So they still did. I mean, the planes have been updated. It's not like they haven't upgraded them at all, but I mean, it is still based on the original design from the 60s of the 737, you know? So, like, it's an old thing. Instead of making a new plane, they wanted to compete, so they wanted to get something quick and just get it done with. So
they designed these engines that were really big for this plane. Like you said, they had to, where they were originally designed to go on the wing, they didn't fit, so they moved them a little more forward so we could get clearance off the ground. And then they implemented the
MCAS system.
MCAS system. So when the plane would take off, let's just say because of that weight, it would pull it down. It would send the nose back to the middle, so the plane would be even instead of pointing up. Yeah.
So the MCAS system, which I read a ton of stuff about it. So the main thing with like where the engines were placed, like Jesus was saying, is that they actually had to move them like not necessarily above the wing, but way farther up. And they didn't think it through that like, oh crap, now the center of gravity of this plane isn't the same. So we'll put in the system and do all this and this, right? Well, anyways, so the MCAS system is very interesting, and the whole story behind it gets even worse. And I'm trying to remember how to explain it properly, but basically, the MCAS system itself is like an override, right? It takes over the plane. So when it feels like, oh, okay, the nose of the plane's coming up too far, it automatically starts pushing it down. So when they got on the plane, right, it shows that like shortly after takeoff, that sensor sent over to the MCAS system that, hey, the nose of the plane is up way too high. But it wasn't. The nose of the plane was flat and level. Everything was fine. The stick shifter on the pilots, like, you know how the pilots steer and stuff, it starts to shake really bad if the plane's going to stall. And that's their signal for, hey, the plane's about to stall. We need to figure out what the heck's going on. Yeah. So the stick shifter starts shaking like crazy. And they can see all of this and hear all of it from the cockpit audio, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And all that stuff. But, you know, it's still giving them a false warning. And it just continues to shake the whole time. So they're like, what the heck is going on? How are we going to save this? Well, because that sensor was reading incorrectly and just activating the MCAS system over and over, the plane was just taking nosedives. And so the pilots were trying to pull it back up, and then it would just immediately nosedive again. They'd pull it back up, and it just kept going and going and going. So they were just constantly fighting towards that downward pulling of the plane.
Yeah.
And eventually, they couldn't pull up anymore, you know?
Yeah, it's called a plane. Once it hits like a downward motion, it'll just shoot down like a missile.
Yeah, well, and one of the things I had heard on a different podcast was actually, I heard a lot about what they heard on the cockpit audio themselves and how the people were talking to each other.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, like, they stopped communicating. Like, the first... I can't remember what the guy is called. First guy? Well,
the pilot?
It's the pilot and then...
The captain?
The captain, but it's the first pilot or something. I don't know. The other pilot has a different name. Anyways, so the two pilots that were in there, we'll just call it, they were, like, at first being like, okay, what do we do? Let's check this. Let's check that. And then one of the pilots, like the second in command dude, they have to go through something called like a memory checklist, and it's something that they're required to do by memory each time because they have to know these steps to be able to fly a plane. Well, apparently the second pilot here, he had been struggling with that, so they had been taking him through and retraining him and doing all this stuff, right? So that already makes him look bad at this point. And then they go over this checklist, they're doing this, they're changing all these little flip switches and all this stuff, and nothing is working. So at this point, like, the main pilot, he goes, you know what, you look through this checklist, I'm gonna, you take the control of the plane, I'm gonna look through the checklist instead, because you're obviously not doing a good job, like, you're taking too long, whatever. So they switch. Well, like I said, communication is key, especially when operating a plane, and anytime one of the pilots does something, like the pilot and co-pilot, like if he flips the switch, he has to tell the other guy, hey, I'm flipping this on, or I'm changing this or changing that. They're supposed to, required to say it out loud. They just weren't saying anything. So the pilot who was flipping on switches and like messing with the way the plane pulled down in the back, he never told the co-pilot, right? So when the co-pilot takes control, the plane's just nosediving, and he's trying to fight it. And at this point, like, the nose pulling down was causing about, like, 82 to 85 pounds of pull on the steering wheel. So he's trying to pull back with, like, 100 to even get it to move. And imagine how hard that is, being in the plane, right?
Especially going down, gravity's working against you.
Yeah, so he ends up 13 minutes in, they crash, and unfortunately there was no survivors. They all passed away. So at this point, Boeing themselves comes out and makes a statement and says, oh, well, an American pilot would have never let this situation, like, have never gotten into this bad situation if it was an American pilot. So, racist much? I don't know, like, that's true. Well, then turns out the pilot was actually trained in the U.S., so, and it's like, ooh.
There goes that statement right out the door. See, what I heard from a little bird, right, is that Boeing, when they designed this plane, they designed it to be the same as, like, say, the previous model. So no training would be required to use it.
Yeah.
But there was, because of the MCAS. But they didn't tell them that they had implemented the MCAS into the planes, which were required simulation training and one-on-one training with the plane. So it would have taken basically months for anyone to be able to use these planes in general. Mm-hmm.
Well, and now there's like a big lawsuit, right? Sorry, I have a dog here now.
Always.
So now that you said that, there was a big lawsuit, or I think it's just been settled, but in the lawsuit, they actually had to do, like, a whole lawsuit against the government. So it's not just like the families. They had to go up against a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And they got all the paperwork from Boeing, and they found out that they intentionally hid the MCAS from the manuals of the plane and from the pilots. They gave them a 2-hour, like, iPad training course, which didn't mention the MCAS at all.
Oh.
So these new pilots, or not new pilots, but the pilots are going in thinking they're just going to be flying a normal 737. But nope. They have no idea what an MCAS is, how it works, or that they can even override it. So this pilot is stuck up there, both of them, panicking because they're like, why in the hell is the plane pulling me down? This makes no sense. And they tried everything that they could without knowing, what the plane was doing, because they had no idea, because they intentionally kept it a secret so that they could keep up with Airbus and get a plane out on the market. And it was, in 2012, the highest selling plane was the 737 MAX 8.
Oh, man.
Mm-hmm.
And you've probably been on one you don't even know.
Yeah, I'm afraid, dude. I have a flight coming up in, a month.
Yeah.
And it is a Boeing 737, but not a MAX. And I'm like, probably shouldn't do a podcast episode on it right before I get on one, but oh well. We'll see. You guys know what happened then because of this episode. Anyways, so more about the MCAS too is that like the MCAS is built to work in the background. So I'm trying to think of a good example, but there's not really a good example. But it's supposed to just be there to stabilize the plane a little bit, right?
Well, but the way I see the MCAS system is it's more like a failsafe.
Yeah.
It's let's just say the most crashes on airplanes are because of the pilots. It's human error. An airplane will almost 100% of the time never crash.
Yeah.
Unless you're Boeing. No, just like
unless you're a Boeing 737 MAX 8. Allegedly. But so one of the other things is that a lot of people and old employees, what we'll call whistleblowers, and we'll talk a lot more about them in a little bit, but they came forward and said that Boeing had started taking a lot of shortcuts. And honestly, this takes us back. And I have all the information, but this is back in I think it was 1997. I told you I took a lot of notes, dude. So back in 1997, McDonnell Douglas and Boeing actually merged. And McDonnell Douglas is they're not good people, let's just say, right? So once that happened, they actually let a ton of people go. And then they started taking shortcuts because at this point it was about stocks. All they cared about was making their stocks go up.
It stopped being about the quality and started being about the quantity.
Exactly, dude. All they cared about was, okay, well, how high are our stocks now? What can we do?
How high can I get?
Yeah, literally, that's kind of what they did. And then Airbus actually took over in stocks. It actually surpassed them because Boeing, once they merged, they just trickled down, dude. And then Airbus was like, thank God, now's our time to shine. Let's freaking get this done. And they did, dude. They got it done. So we'll see what happens next. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
So we'll go back for a second. That's just, the McDonnell Douglas thing is just kind of to tell you when the quality started going down at Boeing, right? So after the first crash, this is when Boeing is like, well, I guess we should probably address the MCAS system. I don't know. Maybe we should tell people about it. So they go ahead and they say, all right, well, we'll do some briefings. So they start calling, all these pilot unions and say, we're just going to come by. We're going to do a quick briefing, tell you guys a little bit about the system. Here's how you turn it off. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So they do that. Well, then 19 weeks after this initial Lion Air crash, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashes. And this is March 10th, 2019. So this one is a little different because the captains had already done that briefing. So they had seen okay, well, this is what Boeing says to do if this happens, right? Well, what happens when they get up there, dude? Same thing. But this time they knew what to do. So at this point, they were up there and I think they started panicking a little. And after a couple minutes, they were like, oh, this is how we turn off the system. Just turn off the system. But at that point, since the plane was going so fast and it was still going in a downward direction, they couldn't save the plane and they couldn't correct it. So they just nosedived all the way down and crashed.
Damn, you think they hit the desert or something?
I actually can't remember exactly how that one crashed. Was it that one, the water too? Were they both water? So. But 157 people died on that.
Oh, man, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of families.
Well, and then they, at this point, call their families and say, hey, and it was a 37-minute flight, too. It was a quick flight. Yeah, so it wasn't like it was going to be an all-night thing. It was a 37-minute flight to their next destination, and they crashed halfway in, And it took them 3 full days to, tell families, hey, the bodies we're not even able to recover the bodies. Actually, this one wasn't in the water. I remember now. This one was actually on land, and so there was a crash site, and there was a big crater in the ground from it, and just plane parts everywhere, but none of the bodies were left. So
this is the one where the biggest body part they could find was how do I say, the size of an ear. Yeah,
it was
which
really
is really
bad.
Sad. Yeah,
It was really bad. Well, even after this happens, then what does Boeing do, dude? They're like, guys, the 737 MAX is safe.
Is the best.
Yeah, it is the best. You can trust us. You've trusted Boeing forever. Keep trusting us.
If it's not Boeing, I'm not going.
Yeah, literally, that's exactly what they used to say, like, back in the day. And, well, at this point, the FAA, they have the right to ground this plane. So they can go ahead and ground the 737 MAX if they want to. What do? Nothing, Jesus. They don't do shit.
They're like, actually, we need that money.
Well, and they literally said, if we find a real problem, we'll ground the flight. There's no proof that it's the plane. We'll ground this plane, you know. There's no proof. Like, you guys are just pushing too far, blah, blah, blah. Well, the day after, or the days to come after the second flight, China actually grounds that specific aircraft. They are like, hell no. We are not flying that thing again. There's something wrong with this plane. Then, to follow, Australia and some places in, like, you know, Europe and stuff like that, they all start grounding it too. So they're like, if they're doing it, we're doing it. Like,
they're like, hey, yo, it doesn't seem safe. Maybe we shouldn't use it. USA's like, shh, keep using it, bro. What do you mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, then it eventually got bad enough that the FAA didn't ground the flight, or the plane. Mm-hmm. Trump himself did.
Ooh.
He said, heck
my man.
He said, no. Ain't happening. So,
but where that money at? No, just kidding.
Yeah. Well, it got so bad that once they grounded the flight, like, they had to take those planes to storage, and they had tons of pilots calling in saying, I don't want to fly that plane to storage. Like, you're going to have to find another way to get it, because I ain't doing it. I ain't getting in one. Yeah, dude.
God, imagine they're like, hey, how much money is it to tow one of those? $3 million. Best we could do is $5.
Yeah, like the guys didn't even want to. Like, the pilots were afraid because they were like, I'm not trying to die just taking this thing to storage. Like, are you crazy?
Yeah, exactly.
Then Peter DeFazio, he's in Congress. He actually is the one who started the whole investigation against Boeing. So, shout out, Peter. Well, it was proven at a certain point that the crew did exactly what they were supposed to do, right? Like I told you, like, they had done the briefing, and it still crashed. So then they came to find out, after doing all their research, that Boeing knew, in their paperwork and in their documents, they specifically stated that they weren't going to train people on MCAS, because they thought it would just be like, oh, like, they'll never know, right? It'll just correct the plane. Like, how would they know? How would they know? And so they did that, and they knew that they were hiding it. So anyone outside of Boeing didn't know about the MCAS. So that means Southwest Airlines, American Airlines, Indonesian Airlines, Lion Air, you know, Ethiopian Airlines. None of these people knew that existed. Only the people who worked at Boeing knew. They intentionally withheld the information because they didn't want to put off the release of that plane due to pilots having to get special certifications and training.
Boeing lied, people died.
Yeah, lots of people, dude. So, this is the other crazy thing about the MCAS system that we found out. It only gives the pilot 10 seconds to react to, like, any movement or adjustment in the plane before it starts to correct. When the MCAS system is engaged, it corrects the plane and takes over for 10 whole seconds, releases for 5 seconds, and if it's not corrected, it goes back on for 10. So the pilot has no control for those 10 seconds, dude.
So it was like that downward for 10 seconds,
so it's like
he had control for 5 seconds, he's like, oh, and then, ah!
Yeah, and so then, but, like, he could try and manually, like, maneuver the plane back up, but it was so strong, and the pressure that it's pulling against you is so much that, like, you're trying to pull, like, let's say 100 or 110 pounds of force toward yourself while sitting in an airplane seat. Like, it's, I don't know, they made it literally impossible to succeed at that point, is what it feels like.
For sure.
So that, like I said, that second crash, like, that's why it happened. Like, they disclosed it again, and then having only the one sensor, that's also a huge mistake. Because, you know, with other planes, or just in general, there's a ton of different sensors. That way, if one of them is faulty, at least the other, 3 or 4, or however many, are reading correctly.
Yeah.
But when there's one sensor gone bad, and that's all you have on an aircraft up in the sky, and it's like, ugh, nope, we need to crash. Like, what's going to happen? You're going to crash. And they knew this, Jesus. They knew it, and that's why it freaking triggers me.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know anyone on the flight who passed away. It's just, like, that's a lot of people's biggest fear, is to go visit their family or go on a plane and crash. And then what?
And then it happens.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then, remember I was talking about, like, the market and stuff and how Airbus took over?
Yes.
That was actually in 2003 that Airbus, like, surpassed them in their market shares and stuff. So, that's when Boeing started going bad, dude. Was when McDonnell Douglas was like, No. Get these stocks up, dude.
He's like, we need profit now.
Yeah, that's literally what happened.
He's like, I need to buy my third mansion in the lake.
Yeah, it made Boeing panic, honestly. Like, they were like, oh, crap, like, we're not going to have billions of dollars anymore. What should we do? I don't know. So now let's talk about the whistleblowers. And you know way more about that than I do.
All right. So we're going to go back, Miranda, when you started talking about the congressman that started bringing out the investigation. Mm-hmm. We had this brave soul named John Barnett. He came out. He was the first one to come out. He sadly passed away. You know, self-inflicted gun wound. Allegedly.
Yeah, supposedly, you mean?
Yeah, he woke up with a gunshot in his head.
And he also said...
But before I get into all that, see, John Barnett, dude, he wasn't even like a crazy Boeing employee. He was just like how do I explain this? He was just an aviation nerd. He loved planes. It was his thing. And he noticed, just being there, that in these past years that they were cutting corners, like you said. Things weren't getting done correctly. You know, instead of using, let's say, lubricant on door seal, they're using dish soap. Like, you would think...
Literally like Dawn dish soap, huh?
Dawn dish soap, yeah. And you would think Boeing being this super big company, they would actually have the proper supplies and tools for their mechanics. But it seems like they were just hiring day laborers. Okay. So, right before John Barnett came out with everything, right, he went to his family, specifically his mom and his friend, saying, you know, I'm about to reveal everything I know about the Boeing to the court. You know, if I were to pass away, or if I were to get, you know, unalive somehow, just know I didn't do it. He was fearing for his life. The next day after, you know, he told his mom and his friend that he had court. In the deposition, he just said what we said, you know, that they weren't following the proper procedures, that the work was inadequate, and it seemed like the cutting corners was more extreme than it was. They were using scrap metal, like, let's just say, okay. They cut like a bent hydraulic line from an old plane, and he put it on this 737 MAX. You know, they would do weird stuff like that just to meet demands of the production. And these planes were being sent off. And all John Barnett said that, hey, this is what's going on with these production. Here's what's happening. And I want to leave. And, well, they fired him before all this happened, obviously, right? And in his disposition, he said what he said about the Boeing. He said, you know, they're crap, basically. And they're going to kill people.
They're taking
shortcuts, and this is going to cost people lives. He said that same day, too. He was leaving to Mississippi that day. That he was scared for his life. Even in court, he says it. And the Boeing lawyers asked him to stay an extra day so he can finish saying his deposition. And in the morning of that next day, he was found dead in his truck after giving part of his deposition the day before.
That's sketch, dude.
So, you know, right now being a whistleblower is more dangerous than owing money to the government.
Or maybe they're connected. I mean, maybe they're both the same. One thing real quick before we talk about more of the whistleblower stuff, and I forgot to mention this before.
Yes.
In the paperwork that DeFazio found, or that Boeing had given him, they actually had proof in there that the FAA ran what's called a TARAM report, and that stands for Transport Airplane Risk Assessment Methodology. And in that report, they run... risk assessment, right? So they go over the statistics of the plane, all the stuff that's in it, and why it crashed, and, you know, they put the MCAS system in and all this stuff. With the way the plane was set up for when the crashes happened, the TARAM report predicted that there would be at least 15 more plane crashes if they didn't fix the software. And that just got kicked to the curb and left behind, and the FAA still didn't ground that plane after giving them that TARAM report, dude. And
I want you guys to know something, too, that literally not that long ago, maybe a year or two ago, the government sent over, it was $1 billion bailout to fix planes, like to fix all these problems that all these planes were having, the crashes and whatnot. So obviously it was towards this Boeing 737 MAX to fix it. And what did they do with that money? They didn't fix their plane.
Mm-mm. They were even promising after this first accident, they're like, within 6 weeks we'll have the new software. We'll have the new software put in, so that it's safer and blah blah. Did they? No.
And they were, before all this happened, they were even planning on deregulating the airplane industry because they thought it was safe enough to where they didn't need to be checking it. And now all that's down the drain. This is going to be a constant thing where they're going to have to be keeping up with their planes every year.
Yep. Well, John Barnett, when he was actually talking, because he did a lot of interviews, and you can go watch his interviews on YouTube and stuff, before he passed away. I didn't know how to say it, what I wanted to say, but before he passed away. And he said that even their people who were doing like the checks on their quality checks on the plane had been, decreased significantly. So instead of having 20 people looking at the plane, there's 10. And so that's why things were missing, because then you have, like you said, they start using Dawn dish soap. They start forgetting bolts in certain spots.
And then at one point they were using hotel key cards to open stuff up.
Yeah, instead of like a screwdriver or something. Yeah,
which doesn't make sense. Like
it's $1 billion company, billions of dollars. I think it was like worth $100 billion or something like that.
And you would think if you're getting hired to work on a plane, you would have the proper tools, no?
Yeah, isn't that just weird? No, all of it just didn't make sense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, allegedly, this guy killed himself, John Barnett, and we're gonna talk about someone, another person, another brave soul. These guys are heroes, honestly, because they came out saying what was happening. Even they knew they were gonna die.
Yeah. Or that it
His
was
name,
possible.
this other whistleblower, Joshua Dean. This guy was I wrote this down. Sorry. He was the Boeing supplier Spirit Aerosystem quality auditor.
Okay.
Big old title. This guy was in charge of, like you said, the people that would do all the checklists for the planes to make sure they were up to standards.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was one of those people. And he came out obviously saying that, these planes aren't built properly. I saw what was happening, the door came off of the plane while it was flying. He was like one of the people being like, yo, this happened because they didn't listen. They didn't listen to like my checklist saying that it wasn't proper.
Well, one of the things that they had said too, the employees that have come out, because I think there's been like 10 more people who have stepped forward. I don't know if their names were released or if they did it publicly or privately, like anonymously. This
guy came out 2 months, a month and a half after John Barnett came out, basically saying that these planes are crap. That's all I'm gonna say. Like, these planes are just crappily made, and that they're not safe to be flying, and we need to take repercussions. Like, there needs to be a case. And he literally went against them, and they fired him a couple days before the court case and all this, just so he wouldn't have a voice or whatever. And then he comes out, in his disposition talks. A week or two later, he comes down with influenza, MRSA, and he developed pneumonia. MRSA, yeah.
And pneumonia. So they Kim Portered his ass.
So apparently, from... his family said he was super healthy. He loved life. He was one of those people, a person that went to church every Sunday. Everyone loved him. And then all of a sudden he just died.
Out of nowhere. So another thing, too, is that I think it was the CEO or one of the lead dudes, right? His name was Dennis Muhlenberg. Mm-hmm. And you can see him on a lot of the court case stuff. He stepped down 2 months after all of this stuff. However, and it's because the board at Boeing, they recommended that he step down. Like, he didn't do it by choice. He still got his pension and all the stocks and stuff like that of up to, I think it was worth up to $62 million he got for leaving the company. Whoa. After all that. And he was the meanie in court that was being like, we're still safe. The 737 MAX is safe. This and this and this.
Oh, it's that guy that was saying we prioritize safety over, or was it quality or something like that?
Yeah. He was out there giving all these speeches and saying how safe they were. And you know what? The honest to God truth is that Boeing did the absolute least that they could possibly do during all this. And
they just didn't care what was happening.
No, they didn't care. And it took all the hearings and all the whistleblowers and all this for them to show even the slightest, teeniest amount of remorse, which I don't know if they have now, but they had at this point still not even apologized to the families, even in court. They had publicly, but they had never reached out to any of the people, said sorry directly to them. They just, on TV, we're very sorry to the families, and that's about it.
Man.
Yeah, well, in January 2021, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, they actually charged Boeing with criminal conspiracy to defraud the FAA. And so Boeing had to pay a big settlement of $2.5 billion to avoid criminal prosecution, basically.
That's all right, bro. The government gives them billions, so they're fine.
So you want to hear where the money went? Apparently, this whole thing costed them at least $20 billion with all the fees and fines and stuff they had to pay.
Yeah.
But that's just, they had to pay the $2.5 billion, which was court ordered. And so the settlement, I wrote it down, includes $243.6 million fine, a $500 million fund for the victim compensation, so their families got $500 million just put up. Mm-hmm. Nearly $1.8 billion to the airlines whose MAX jets had to be grounded for at least, nearly 2 years. And I believe they're still grounded now, permanently.
Damn.
I'm pretty sure. I'll have to look it up to be exact. Well, I looked it up, and it says every Boeing 737-9 MAX with a plug door will remain grounded until the FAA finds each can safely return to operation. Because that plug door opened and swung open during that Alaska Airlines flight. So, see, you have all that. This is not just like a one-time thing. It's not even just the deadly crashes. There's other things. There were also...
It's a history of bad incidents that don't get fixed.
Yeah, and because they were leaving, like metal shards and stuff too, like in places. And you think, oh, that's not that bad, like some metal shavings, whatever. But if those fly up when the plane is going up and down and moving, and one touches one of the electrical wires, boom, the whole plane's fried and going to fall from the sky. Like, you know what I mean?
That or it could explode, yeah.
It can explode, all that stuff. Well, speaking of, actually, Jesus, I don't know why, that just brought things up. Just last week on June 5th, 2024, Paris, yeah, a flight in Paris, it was flight AC-872. It was an Air Canada flight in a Boeing 777.
Ooh.
Burst into flames as soon as it left the runway, dude, and it was caught on tape.
Was it spontaneous combustion?
They said it had something to do with... I really don't even know. The combustion of an engine.
The wiring, dude. The scrap metals in the wires.
Probably. I don't know, but something happened there. Allegedly, who knows if this was Boeing? So I don't want to put any blame and get sued.
Obviously, this is all allegedly, guys.
Yeah, this is just maybe this happens. I don't know, but that did actually happen. So yeah, I don't know. There's gonna be more to come because all of this is just it's not over. I can tell you that much.
And I'm pretty sure we're going to have more plane incidents because if no one stops Boeing from what they're doing, it's just going to continue to happen.
Yeah. Paying out the settlements isn't enough anymore.
Paying out the settlements isn't fixing the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So, we'll see. What do you guys think is going to happen and come from all this?
Thanks for listening, guys.
We out.
Yeehaw, brother.